Hey guys, it's the Tominator. So we finally have a new bodybuilding show to cover, and it's obvious from the view counts and comments on other channels that a lot of people were super excited for this. There was a ton of hype surrounding Blessing Awodibu. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but this guy was making his pro debut, and especially after all the smack talk he was doing on social media. And I think that bodybuilding fans are just sort of starved for new content at this point. But I, for one, didn't really care that much. I never bought into the hype, and objectively speaking, this wasn't really a great lineup. After recently revisiting all these legendary 90s contests with Ronnie and Flex and Lavroni, I'm pretty ambivalent about what was brought to the stage this weekend. It just doesn't even compare. And as for Blessing, don't get me wrong, it was a good first showing, no doubt, very solid. But after running his mouth for months, telling us how much better he is than Nick Walker and saying he's gonna change bodybuilding and all that, well, let's just say that the reality was a little underwhelming, to say the least. Anyway, let's get into the comparisons and start dissecting these guys. So in all these photos, the angle is slightly off, so it actually favors Blessing since he's nearest to the camera. From left to right, you have Blessing, Awodibu, Mohammed ElEmam, Justin Rodriguez, and Dorian Haywood. And in this front double bi, I'm going with Justin. You could give it to Blessing based on this look, and it is probably his strongest pose, but the lower body just isn't quite there. And here's a prediction. This is a pretty safe prediction too. Blessing will never have Mr. Olympia caliber wheels. Like, never. I know he's young, but the genetics just aren't there. You can tell by looking at the muscle bellies and the overall shape of the quads that this will always be a weak point for him. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that he'll never be able to qualify for the Olympia or anything like that, but I am saying that those legs will almost certainly be the limiting factor on his potential. Otherwise, I really like his upper body here. Those biceps are a real standout feature. He just needs a bit more tricep sweep to balance it out. Justin, on the other hand, is already pretty well balanced in this pose, top to bottom. His legs are also somewhat of a weak point, but they look serviceable here. His waist is a bit thick, but his arms and the lats are so massive they effectively make up for it. And I really like that little Victor Martinez tilt he does. It adds a nice aesthetic touch. Mohammed, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this dude's name either because it's got a K in it, but I'm just going to say it like Mohammed. So he actually looks okay, but is getting overshadowed standing in between Blessing and Justin. His quads are better than either of theirs, but his arms look a little undersized. And Dorian Haywood on the far right is getting the short end of the stick in this crop of photos. He's furthest from the camera and the angle is pretty off for him. But one thing you can still notice is that his conditioning isn't quite on the same level. It looks like he's holding some water upstairs. These pics are mostly taken from the finals, and I think this is where he probably faded a bit and Blessing came on stronger after prejudging. The front lat spread is another nice shot for Blessing. He looks pretty aesthetic in it with those big wide delts and small waist, but he needs to bring up those lats to fill it out better. As it is, he's not winning this because the lats and quads both need to come up. Based on this shot, I'd probably go with Mohammed because he's very balanced and his lats look the most prominent, but it's not a very flattering look for Justin. So here's another pic with just these three, and Justin pulls ahead now. Again, because of the camera angle, whoever stands on the left is getting an advantage, but regardless, I'm just seeing the lights hit him more favorably now, and all that upper body mass is tough to beat. Dorian is definitely last because his midsection is bloated and he's not showing enough separation through the thighs. Man, it sounds weird saying Dorian is coming last in the front lat spread, right? But this is Haywood we're talking about, not Yates. Alright, onto the side chest, and this is where Blessing's lack of fullness really bites him in the butt. He looked pretty flat at this show, and his chest is thin as a pancake here compared to the other guys. He still might be beating Mohammed just because of the size element and his conditioning, but he's not upsetting Rodriguez or Haywood in it. Those guys simply have too much thickness from the side. I would probably give this one to Justin because he's the most complete. Mohammed and Dorian are both lacking that separation between the hamstrings and quads, And Blessing, as we already mentioned, is a little too thin and flat, especially through the pecs. There's other footage out there taken from a more head-on angle that shows that Blessing is pretty out of his depth here in this pose. He needs way more mass and density. I'd have him a distant 4th here, maybe even 5th based on this look. The back double is a fairly easy win for Justin. When he's on, there's not too many people in the world who can hang with him in this shot. The shoulders, back, and biceps are all immense. Blessing has good detail and shows some promise here. If there's any pose that he can make major improvements in, it's probably this one, because the potential is there. He just needs to bring up those lats, especially the lower lats, and further develop those hams and glutes. Plus, just add more overall size, straight up. And of those 3 suggestions, adding more overall size is the easiest one to achieve. That's going to happen for sure. The kid's only like 29, I believe, and he's got a ton of room to fill out his big frame. Haywood's not getting a fair chance at all in this pic, so here's a second look where you can note some more thickness on his physique. His lower back and hamstring definition is very good, but otherwise he doesn't look dry enough compared to these two. ElEmam shows perhaps the most detail and muscle maturity right now, but he's just getting outmassed by Rodriguez badly. And that's taking into account that Justin is overstepping the line. The rear lat spread is another obvious win for Justin. He's so much wider than anybody else, it's not even funny. Blessing is like the exact opposite. He looks slender as hell, and those lower lats are MIA. His conditioning is good, but he's way too underdeveloped. This has got to be his weakest pose so far. Once again, for poor Dorian's sake, let's move on to another photo, where he still lands in 3rd. I think the order here is pretty clearly 1, 2, and 3, from left to right respectively. The side triceps, again, I feel belongs to Justin. It's close. He's not running away with it like the last pose, but he's just got that hard, grainy mass, which is so hard to beat when you're not missing any body parts. And he's not missing anything in this shot. Even the calves are there. Mohammed is hanging right there with him too. It's amazing, actually, how similarly these guys compare going pose for pose. But the lower body isn't as good. I actually think his triceps might be a little better than Justin's though, but it's not enough of a difference to put him ahead. Haywood looks solid, but he needs a bit more hamstring sweep from the side, and he's got to watch that midsection, which even in this photo looks ready to spill out at any moment. His triceps and shoulder look nice, but his chest is too flat for that thick waist. Blessing looks very aesthetic, lots of detail and good conditioning from the side, and I love that sunken midsection. His arm is huge, but could use a bit more separation in the triceps horseshoe area. That would really set off this pose for him and make it arguably his strongest mandatory. In fact, he probably beats this whole lineup if you give him that. But as it is, I'd have him no higher than 2nd. The ab and thigh is once again close but no cigar for Awodibu. He's got the best midsection by far with those deeply etched abs, although his obliques look surprisingly blocky, but those legs just aren't up to par. Mohammed could be winning if he had any abdominal definition whatsoever, because he's got the best quads from the front. That's not saying much maybe in this call-out, but still. Dorian looks okay, but is lacking too much quad separation. You really only catch a bit of that down by his knee, but the upper 2/3 are way too smooth. So that leaves us with Justin as the only one to have semi-decent abs and thighs. Ordinarily, I'd say this is a pretty lackluster ab shot. His waistline is wide and blocky, and he's too top-heavy. But in a more shallow lineup such as this, it's probably enough to get the job done. You could make an argument for Blessing as well, since his midsection is far and away the best here. But once again, I'll remind you that these photos are very flattering to the guy standing on the left, so I think Blessing is actually comparing better here than was really the case. Here's a second look where we do indeed see some separation in Mohammed's midsection and slightly more cuts in Haywood's thighs, so that's encouraging. Rodriguez's abs also look sharper though, so I'd still have him winning, despite the undersized quads. The Most Muscular is another one that nobody really knocks out of the park. They all have flaws or missing pieces to the puzzle, so to speak. With Justin, it's the lack of triceps. With Mohammed, it's the short biceps and the too small arms. With Dorian, it's subpar conditioning. And with Blessing, it's a lot of things in this particular pose. His midsection looks blocky, the shoulders need more mass, the arms, which usually look great, at least in terms of the biceps, appear mediocre here, and the quads need work big time. I'd be curious to see how he fares in the crab Most Muscular. It might have worked better for him. But given these respective shortcomings, I think Justin once again comes out on top, pretty much by default. To me, this outcome was never much in doubt. Even going into the show, Justin was the frontrunner on paper. His physique is still pretty flawed with a big waist and underdeveloped quads, and I doubt at this stage he's going to be able to do anything to change that, really. I haven't seen any significant improvements from him in the past year, so his success mainly depends on how well conditioned he comes in and whether or not he can keep that midsection in check. But on the plus side, he does have a bunch of strong features and some pretty heavy-hitting poses. So if he keeps this shape, he'll continue to be a threat to the top 10 at the Olympia. It was a well-deserved and pretty convincing victory by my estimation. As for Blessing, I'm honestly sick of talking about him and everyone giving him so much attention. Yes, he's got potential, but do I see him as a future Mr. Olympia candidate? No, not even close. To be blunt, what I see when I look at Blessing is basically a discount Patrick Moore. A guy with some nice lines, biceps, and aesthetics, but who's still very underdeveloped and has been massively overhyped and prematurely crowned as the next big thing. In this case, it's even worse because the only person who seems to consider Blessing the next big thing is Blessing himself. Look, I don't mind cocky athletes when they can back it up, but when you talk this much trash and don't even win a small show in a relatively weak lineup, I mean, come on, let's get real here. That's just obnoxious. Anyway, guys, sorry about the little rant there, but I'm probably not the only one who feels this way. I guess one positive effect is that it certainly helped build interest in this show, so it was good for marketing and promotional purposes at least. In any case, hopefully you enjoyed this little breakdown, and what are your guys' thoughts on this one? Would you agree that Justin won it convincingly? And what's your opinion on Blessing and his third place finish here? Let us know in the comments, and next weekend we'll be taking a look at the New York Pro, which should be an even better contest with a deeper lineup. But until then, it's the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back!